Welcome to the Jaco Report. I'm Charles Jaco. Thank you very much for joining us. Today we're going to be joined by Kim Gardner. She is the circuit attorney for the city of St. Louis. When Raymond Chandler wrote his detective novel, The Big Sleep, back in 1939, he was writing about pre-World War II Los Angeles, but he could very well have been writing about St. Louis today when he had Detective Philip Marlowe say, "There are so many guns in this town and so few brains." St. Louis has the 13th highest murder rate in the world. The St. Louis Police Department shoots suspects at a higher rate than any other major American police department. The relationship between law enforcement and the community it serves is split along racial, income, and class lines. When cops do bring a case, it's up to our guests to prosecute it. St. Louis City Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner, elected in 2016. She became the first African-American circuit attorney in city history. Her term so far has been busy and controversial, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Ms. Gardner, thank you very much for taking the time to come in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Back in August, you created a bit of a stir when you created a so-called exclusion list. There were 27 city cops whose word couldn't be trusted, who'd lied about something, and you said these officers, we're not going to prosecute any cases they brought, we're going to look at all the cases they've brought in the past. That got you a lot of heat from the City Police Union, the City Police Department, the Public Safety Director, the Chief of Police, on, and yet this week 55 current and former prosecutors and law enforcement officials from around the country, including the former Solicitor General of the United States, came out with a statement in favor of your so-called exclusion list and what you were doing. Now, explain that to the audience who aren't aware of it. An exclusion list, which is known in the rest of the country as something called a Brady list, is what?
Well, basically, it is, we call it exclusion list in the city of St. Louis, but like you said, in other parts of the country, it's a Brady list. And what it is based off of Brady v. Maryland, which is a court case that talks about if there's officers and their credibility or they're not truthful in cases, that it's our duty as prosecutors to turn that information over and to make a determination to exclude that person as a witness of a court case, as well as evaluate if they can even bring cases. And so in this case, our exclusion list basically says that when credibility is at issue, as a prosecutor, I have the discretion under my duties under the Constitution to exclude entertaining any warrant applications in those instances.
It was interesting that these prosecutors and law enforcement officials came out with that statement this week, supporting it, pointing out that exclusion lists or Brady lists are not unusual, but are actually a fairly common tool of prosecutors around the country.
Yes, and it's essential. I mean, it was one of the things in the support, which I appreciate, was that even a chief of police said that this is necessary to keep the integrity of the police department as well as the criminal justice system. And I think that is what is at stake when we deal with law enforcement officers as any other witness. We want credibility and credible individuals who come before us that we decide to charge a case.
Now, your office went through the records, and there were, last time I looked, was it a dozen or so cases involving these officers that ended up being dismissed? Is that correct?
Well, what you're talking about is we had individuals that were indicted, and out of those 4 individuals, there were 91 cases.
That was the indicted police officers. In the case of these 27 cops, I mean, their names have not been made public, their offenses have not been made public. I can assume safely that these 27 officers, to the best of your satisfaction in the circuit attorney's office, had been caught lying somewhere about something in an official capacity. True?
Well, there's many different reasons why they're on this list, and one of the reasons is credibility. And at that point, that's why I made a decision to put them on the list and no longer entertain any warrant apps in these instances.
Well, what about the police department's statement that, look, we're down 145 officers, it's hard enough, you take 27 cops who can no longer refer cases to the city attorney, that really hurts our ability to fight crime?
Well, I say to that, what about the 91 cases that I had to dismiss because of the actions of certain officers that in the instance of justice, we have to be about public safety, and if we cannot trust the credibility of that officer, then look at what happens when an officer is not truthful, then I have to end up making a decision to dismiss cases, which also puts us at harm. So I think we have to look at that both ways.
Now, the police department expressed shock and surprise at all of this. You've had a running disagreement with Chief Hayden about this, him saying, well, we didn't know anything about this, and your office saying, no, we told you all about this. Where does that stand in your relationship with the chief?
Well, we have a good relationship, and we had a conversation that, with Chief Hayden, and we came out and said that we're going to continue to look at this, we're going to work together. But at the same time, I, as a prosecutor, have a job, and I will continue to evaluate these cases case by case, as well as evaluate the exclusion list and individuals on that list. And we will continue to have discussions about the list and how we're going to proceed. And I think that, Chief Hayden, as the chief of police, he has his opinions, but at the same time, we're going to work together because, like you said, these are actually 28 officers, and we have, about 1,300 police officers. So we have many other men and women who do their job the right way, and we continue to work well together, and it's about the public safety of the community.
But you had to dismiss 91 cases that these 28 cops were involved in. In addition, 12 cases from the 4 officers who were indicted by the federal grand jury for misconduct and beating the black undercover cop during the Jason Stockley protests. So that's 103 cases just in those 2 instances that your office has had to dismiss because of misconduct by police officers. I mean, what does that do to public safety? I would imagine there are some in the 102, 103 cases there that, the victims are wondering, what happened? Why was this case thrown out?
Well, in these instances, these cases are considered victimless cases. A victim case has other witnesses that we can present to go forward with the case, even if that officer is excluded. So those officers are not the sole witness on those cases, so they can't proceed. But in terms of where those officers are the only witness, we had to make that decision to dismiss that case because of credibility issues.
What would you say your relationship is like with the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department? I know a lot of rank and file don't particularly care for you. I know you've taken a lot of heat at various times from people in the command structure, and you've certainly taken heat from the St. Louis Police Officers Association, the cop union. That would seem to the average citizen to say, wait a minute, there's a disconnect here between the circuit attorney's office, the prosecutor, and the cops who are bringing the cases, and that can't be good for public safety.
Well, I think that, that's a good question. And the question I like to even state that is men and women every day that I interact with that support the changes that I'm making in the office, because that makes their jobs safe. When we talk about criminal, cases as well as community trust with law enforcement in general, it's the police as well as the prosecutor's office that everyone's afraid of. And what sacrifice public safety is that mistrust. And to build trust, it's about building respect in the community to hold anyone accountable, regardless of their occupation or station in life. And that's what we're sending the message. And police officers, day to day, who do the hard work the right way, support that. But at the same time, you look at the police union, that's an organization that advocates for individual officers and for a one-sided view. And of course, they're going to disagree with most things that any prosecutor, even the one before me. So we have these discussions and we have these different ideas, but for the most part, the police officers day to day, maybe not the police union higher ranking officials like Jeff Rorta, they support what we're doing because it makes them safer. It makes their job easier. And, if you look at the 55 individuals from around the country, law enforcement agrees that this makes every officer safe in the communities when they can do their job the right way.
Now, you're part of a so-called new wave of prosecutors who've been elected recently on advocating for reforms, along with Wesley Bell in St. Louis County and others. Those reforms include reforming the cash bail system, easing back on marijuana possession prosecutions, things like that. How do reforms like that, broadly speaking, make the public any safer? If you reform the cash bail system, if you're not prosecuting simple marijuana possession cases, how does all that taken together make the average person trying to live their lives in the city of St. Louis safer?
Well, I ask that same question to people who challenge whether reform works. How have we made our city safe up to this point? St. Louis City has been one of the most violent cities since I've been alive. And people have said, well, how are we doing the same thing and expecting a different result? But what we know, I look at crime as a public health crisis. As you know, I'm a registered nurse, so I look at crime. How do we address the root causes of crime so we can address, the lack of hopelessness that individuals are going to the criminal justice system, but not sacrificing public safety? So we look at crime on a continuum. And I say, as you know, in the healthcare world, when you go to the hospital, you don't want to stay in longer period of times because you get sicker. So they let you out and they triage you to different types of programs or health options that create a better health outcome. Well, in the criminal justice system is the same thing. We need a better criminal outcome in terms of public safety. And so nonviolent offenders, putting them in the situation where they are more likely to become career criminals is not creating public safety, is actually creating greater harm to our communities. And what we found, even the 2 years I've been there, crime has gone down and we are doing these reforms. And so that's a direct correlation that reform works in terms of making our city safer so we can focus on the violent individuals that we may need to take off the streets, to focus on instead of the lower level individuals that once we have an interaction with the criminal justice system and we engage them in a heavy-handed way, this smart on crime approach is better than just a simple blanket tough on crime approach.
Speaking of reforms, the Missouri Supreme Court recently ruled that you can simultaneously prosecute suspects who may have been shot by St. Louis police and at the same time investigate the cops who do the shootings. Is that common practice where there's a police-involved shooting where you're going to investigate both parties?
Yes, that is a common practice. We have, under the special order as well as that was under Chief Dotson, the police officers have a force investigation unit. So automatically when an officer shoots anyone, whether they end up passing away or they're injured, automatically an officer-involved shooting case is opened up under the force investigation unit. Well, it's our duty, and under Jennifer Joy, she created the officer-involved shooting prosecutor unit that also investigates the potential criminal charge of that officer-involved shooting. And so we technically do that.
So would this be a hint that there may be more prosecutions of cops on your watch to come?
Well, I think that, we have to look at, I can't say it's more. I think we were going to do a more thorough investigation because, public safety in terms of how we move the city forward, post Mike Brown, we have to look at how we really investigate these officer-involved shootings and whether potential criminal charges can be initiated against those officers. So under my leadership, we have strengthened that officer-involved shooting unit. We actually have proposed legislation to have an independent investigative unit that is not just addressing officer-involved shooting, but at the same time, public corruption and public integrity. So we are strengthening, we are asking actually the Board of Aldermen to fund a unit like that so we can have dedicated experienced investigators, experts, as well as a group of experienced attorneys who that's all they do.
How much of a learning curve has there been in your time in office? I ask that because there had been early on some reports of turmoil in your office and staff turnover. There was your involvement in the Eric Greitens case, which the Kansas City Star referred to in an editorial as, quote, an unprofessional fiasco on your part. Has part of this been ideological differences within your department? Has part of it been kind of feeling your way along on how to manage an organization like this? Or has part of it just been you have a completely different view on how to enforce the law than a lot of other people in the office?
Well, I think that when you have change, and we're in a time where criminal justice reform is at the forefront of this new concept in terms of how we look at mass incarceration, how we make our cities safer. And so prosecutors in this era, right at this point, this critical point that prosecutors have never kind of had these robust discussions, we have to address a lot of different issues that even my predecessor did not have to address. So such as how do we end mass incarceration, how we deal with the officer-involved shooting cases that once I took office, there was one every 2.5 weeks during my first year. So in terms of, and then the policies of how we have stand your ground laws that actually make police officers less safe, makes the officer involved shooting cases go up because the appearance of a gun is more prevalent when you give everyone access to guns without having any policy that we keep the guns out of the wrong people's hands. But at the same time, we have many different issues that we have to address as reform prosecutors. But I say to that, when you have change in a system that's been around for decades, and when people have been comfortable with the status quo of keeping things the same, when you have a person like myself who thinks the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result, and to have the courage to say, well, let's do something different, many people and many career prosecutors somehow will not support that. And I respect that. And I don't take our turmoil in our office. I actually respect the individuals who said, I don't want to be a part of this reform, and they wanted to go on to different things.
St. Louis still is in the top 15 for per capita murder rates on the entire face of the earth. We're one of the most violent cities in the United States. The crime statistics are getting slightly better, but still, in comparison to other cities, we're either ranked first or second. What initiatives are out there that can make the average person who's just trying to get by and send their kids to school without them being hurt, whether they live in the Ville or Carondelet or any other neighborhood in the city, that this madness is going to stop, that all the gunplay is going to stop, the carjackings are going to stop, the random shootings where children get shot are going to stop? I mean, couldn't the case be made that in order to stop that, you have to really put the fear of God into a lot of these people and prosecute them very robustly with the police?
Well, I say we are prosecuting people vigorously, but let's prosecute the people who are the crime drivers. When we blanket our communities like we've done in over-police areas where these areas are over-policed, overcharged in some instances, we've made our cities less safe. We've created hopelessness, and we created a cycle of hopelessness that prosecutors are choosing to deal with. We have a lot of mental health issues. We have lack of education issues. We have mental health issues that a prosecutor now, like myself, has to bring resources to bring that mental health person inside the office. Look at how we give that person job opportunities through SLATE. Look at how we can address the root cause of poverty so they can get out of this situation, so they can live a life to become a productive taxpayer as well as citizen, to inspire the generations behind them that can say crime is not an option. And that's why, as a prosecutor, we're getting into the communities earlier by having diversion centers where we're looking at addressing kids before they even get into any system, because once an individual gets into the juvenile system, that's a downward spiral. Once that individual's parent has been incarcerated, the kids are more likely to be incarcerated going forward. And how do we break this cycle of hopelessness is we have to do things differently, but we as prosecutors have to say we've done things wrong. And I want to say that out of all the 115 counties in Missouri, St. Louis City has incarcerated more people, sent more people to prison every year than even St. Louis County.
And it hasn't worked.
And we are still less safe. So let's do something different. And what we've shown with just the few policies that we have enacted in the community, in a short period of time, crime has gone down, and we're going to do better. We work with Jeff Jensen, the U.S. Attorney, so they can focus on those crime drivers. We work with them in some of the complex carjackings. We work with, our unit works with the homicide to create, our crime strategies unit to address those crime drivers who are shooting and doing these things. And we are working well together, but at the same time, we didn't get here overnight, so you can't expect this massive change overnight, but we are seeing changes and we know it works. And so I say to individuals in the community that we have to, let's all be a part of the solution. We can all criticize and say St. Louis is the most dangerous city, but St. Louis has been this way for a while. And so let's come together, let's work together, let's fund many different programs that we are spearheading in terms of getting people social services, and let's be part of the solution instead of saying, well, St. Louis has been violent, but I love the city. I know the city can change. This is a show me state. We can do better, and we're going to do better under my leadership.
St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner. Ms. Gardner, thank you very much for coming in. We appreciate it. We're glad she could join us, and we're glad you could be here too on the Jaco Report. Please be back with us for our next program here on the Jaco Report.